You're calculating the poverty line all wrong, according to economist Michael.
Should the true poverty line be $140,000? No, I think it is a ridiculous abuse of math and the English language, and the creator of that video asked that I would respond to Green's article. First, let's talk about income categories. Standard of livings aren't binary. You're not either rich or poor or in the middle. Rather, there's this whole continuum from zero to billions. Around 12% of the population lives below the supplemental poverty line. That's around $40,000 for a family of four. The median household income, meaning half of households are higher and half of households are lower, is $84,000 a year. And the article by Michael Green, who's a finance bro, by the way, he's not an economist, claims that 140,000 should be it. That would place it around the 70th percentiles. How does he calculate this number? Well, he knows that the original poverty line was calculated because a third of a household budget was spent on food. So they took the food budget, multiplied by 3, and get a number. But then he fails to notice how it's updated since then. They haven't just adjusted for the cost of food since the 60s, they adjust for the entire cost of living as measured by the CPI. But then he does his really weird method choice. He notes that food at home is no longer a third of household spending, it's now closer to 5 to 7%. Then he goes on to note that the rest of life, housing, healthcare, childcare, have all gotten so expensive that it's now pushed down what we can spend on food. And that multiplier should no longer be 3, but it should be 60. Now, he's made two basic errors that I hope you can follow along. One, that the annual updates to the poverty threshold are using all of consumer prices, not just the price for groceries, and that housing itself is the single largest component of the CPI. And second, he implicitly assumes that the reason why groceries are such a smaller share of our budget than they used to be back in the 60s is because the cost of everything else is rising so much. But this isn't true. Back in the 1960s, we went from spending around a third of our budget on non-necessities to now more than half. Specifically looking at food, we spend so much less of our budget on groceries, we now can afford to spend more at restaurants. In fact, just recently, like in the past 5 years or so, we now spend more going out to eat than we do eating at home. Now, at this point in his analysis, he starts to use some numbers we can actually work with. He puts together a budget that, quote, is conservative and using national average data. He says it's no frills, no vacation, no Netflix, just a participation ticket. But my first issue when I look at this is that it's completely unsourced. I have no idea where he got it from or whether he even just made it up. There's no transparency. I can't replicate it. I mean, take healthcare, $10,500 a year, but the average premiums for a family plan are closer to $6,800 according to KFFF survey. And here's another error that he makes with housing. He looks at the city of Caldwell, New Jersey, and says that there were exactly 7 two-bedroom units available in the entire town, the cheapest one going for $2,700 a month. But then when I went on Zillow, I found a half a dozen below that, including this one for just less than $2,000. But Caldwell, New Jersey is not a typical American town. Nationally, the median rent is $1,490 for a two-bedroom in 2024. The Washington Post recently ran a story on it. It published Michael Green's budget without sourcing or independently verifying the numbers. And I think this speaks to a broader problem in society. America is number illiterate. A lot of times media just publishes numbers without critically thinking. When many are confronted by the numerical inaccuracies of Michael Green's data, they throw up their hands and ask, well, the numbers don't really matter. It's about starting a conversation or communicating our feelings. Now, I want to acknowledge that feelings are incredibly important, and to be the middle class has always entailed a certain level of struggle and serious trade-offs. If we want to solve society's affordability crisis, we need to accurately diagnose it. Fake numbers leads to distractions from real solutions. Now, because economists do pay attention to numbers, we basically figured out more or less where he's getting them from. And it doesn't come from a measure for a ticket to survive. It comes from a measure for a ticket to thrive and comfort. The MIT wage calculator calculates a living wage, or as some have called, a comfortable life. And here's where we get kind of personal. I make significantly less than $140,000 a year, and frankly, I have never felt more prosperous in my life. I eat out once or twice a week. I travel regularly. I took my family to Scotland recently. I bought a brand new truck with cash, easily afford all my basic necessities, I have money set aside for emergencies, and yes, I have Netflix. So a lot of this article and reaction thereto baffles me just based on my own personal experience. But let's go back to the data. His numbers are not a conservative national average, but rather come from that Caldwell, New Jersey, in other words, Essex County. And if we look at a family of four where both parents are working, we get a comfortable living wage of $136,000 a year, which is pretty close to his estimate of $140,000. If there's just one parent working, then you only need to have $96,000 a year to achieve the same standard of living. But if you live, say, in Lubbock, Texas, then you only need $92,000 for a two-parent working household, or just $75,000 for one parent working, to achieve that same standard. But these are measures of average, or even above average thriving, and not a measure of poverty, at least not by any known acceptable definition of that English word. But finally, I actually agree with his two policy recommendations. He suggests expanding the earned income tax credit. You see, there's this serious problem in our welfare system that economists have long pointed out called a benefits cliff, that as soon as you get a modest raise or a little promotion at work, you lose out on your benefits, and in net, you become worse off. This harms upward mobility. The earned income tax cut solves this by only gradually decreasing benefits. It keeps paying out at smaller levels even as you enter the middle class. I even like it more than the minimum wage, and I agree with Green, we should expand this and make it more generous. And Green also says that we should strip away government regulations that block housing construction. Fully agree. But at the end of the day, does any of Green's fake numbers matter? Yes. Because by nearly every measure, we have had substantial progress in the standard of living of nearly every American since the 1960s. And even if we use this new standard of a household making at least $140,000 in 2024, today, 75% of households are below that figure. Back in the 1970s, it was more than 95%. This is generational progress. If we can't recognize the progress we've made in the past, how can we possibly create more progress in the future?